Hello everyone, welcome back. What is there left to say about Sword Art Online? By now it's possible that even people who have never seen the show know Reki Kawahara's name and have been biased either for or against his work. I think that by now there isn't much point in trying to change people's minds about it. The discussion around the show has fallen into a sort of tribalism. For more on that subject, I've linked CGP Gray's excellent video on the subject, "This video will make you angry." However, there is something left to say about it. It's something which I think needs to be said, and it's something that everybody, regardless of their opinion on the show, needs to hear. Sword Art Online is a work of philosophy. Now, before you roll your eyes hard enough to snap your retinal nerve, hear me out. Philosophy is a fundamental subject which is woefully understudied nowadays. Personally, I blame the philosophers who followed Immanuel Kant's lead of divorcing philosophy from reality. This, more than anything else, is the cause of lax thinking nowadays. But I digress. Philosophy is so fundamental that there is emergent behavior tied up in the organization of knowledge relating to it. If you're curious, select a Wikipedia article, click the first link, then click the first link on that article, and repeat. According to the Wikipedia article on the subject, more than 93% of starting articles will eventually chain back to the article about philosophy in this manner. Wikipedia's article, Getting to Philosophy, linked below, claims that this phenomena is probably caused by the style guide for Wikipedia requiring that introductory paragraphs define the subject and that definitions refer to broader categories to which the subject belongs. I think that the reason philosophy, rather than some other topic, is the central node of that graph, is because the questions and problems of philosophy have their answers baked into every other aspect of human thought and action. Philosophy, in one paragraph, featuring multiple semicolons, is the parent subject of metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Metaphysics is the subject which asks, what is? Epistemology asks, how do you know? And ethics asks, what should you do? Every human thought or action must be made with reference to some or all of these questions, and implicitly provides an answer. Doing anything implies that you've judged whether you should or should not do that thing, and you had to know stuff about that thing before you could evaluate it. And you had to have a way to know things in order to know them. From this observation, we can conclude that Kirito's actions from the beginning of the Aincrad arc through to Alicization have had philosophical dimensions which bear analyzing. In the second and third episodes of Sword Art Online, we see Kirito responding to the vitriolic attitude towards beta testers by drawing the ire of the people who went to the first boss fight. He manages to carry this off, and takes the blame for the death of Diablo while he's at it. Almost immediately, we see that he's upset, because this will lead him to social isolation. From there, he goes on to lie to a group of players half his level in order to gain their trust and friendship. He admires the guild for their idealism. He thinks that Keita, their leader, in particular, could make a positive difference in the social scene of the high-ranking elite teams. Unfortunately, Kirito's lies lead the guild to becoming overconfident. All of them, other than Keita, die in an ambush they weren't equipped to handle, and Keita later commits suicide while damning Kirito for being a beater who should not have been with the party. Now, the fact that Kirito isn't a catatonic vegetable, the fact that Kirito is able to make choices about his actions in the world he lives in implies the possibility that he could have beliefs about those actions and choices. If no choices were possible, then we're stuck thinking that human beings are determined in the sense that there is no free will. But it is self-evident in your experience of your life that you do have free will. At any given moment, you can choose whether to think about things as an act of will, or you can relax and not think. Since all human action, I'd argue even the reflexive ones, are in some way the product of your thinking or failure to think, humans do have free will, and that does include the possibility of forming a set of moral beliefs, and evaluating people, and their choices, by the standards of your moral beliefs. Human beings are able to form moral beliefs. Kirito is human, Therefore, Kirito can form moral beliefs. So if Kirito can form moral beliefs, does he? What do his actions imply about his beliefs, or do they imply a lack of beliefs? Let's assume that in the first 3 episodes, Kirito never believes he's doing the wrong thing. We see him seek to both martyr himself into social isolation to protect the innocent beta testers from popular resentment, but then he lies in order to gain a social circle. The observed behavior makes the initial assumption seem absurd. It is more likely that Kirito has avoided forming moral beliefs about his actions at this point because the things he wants out of life contradict one another. Say, didn't I make a badly composed monologue about exactly that? Kirito avoids forming moral beliefs either because he can't be bothered to, or because doing so would force him to confront the possibility that some part of his actions were evil and necessarily self-destructive. What about those other questions of philosophy? What is? Kirito is living in a metaphysically interesting situation. Philosophers of a Platonic bent who've spent more time thinking about the allegory of the cave, no, not that one, than they do actually doing a useful day's work, will doubtless find the idea of living in a world that was verifiably created by another human being fascinating. However, in fixating on this thought experiment, you're liable to miss the work of Plato's student Aristotle. Aristotle, to the best of my knowledge, was the first philosopher to observe the principle of non-contradiction, which forms the most abstract theoretical basis for my discussions on contradictory desires and values. Kirito, in taking the view that SAO is not a game but is now real life, unwittingly, perhaps, observes that the world he lives in is not an illusion, but rather is the form which reality takes as judged by his senses. Yes, there may be a known cause which allows him to perceive a simulation, as though it were a tangible world similar to the real world, but that does not change the fact that he and the world he lives in are entities which exist in reality which do not violate the principle of non-contradiction. Everything here will behave according to its nature, and therefore, just as in the real world, it is real life, in the manner most applicable to survival. Unfortunately for my appraisal of this teenaged douche lord, there's no way in all the purple hells of Palain that you'll be able to form a convincing argument to support the notion that Kirito understood any part of what I just said when he made the observation at the end of episode 1 that this is real life now. The good news, however, is that even doing so much as implying the principle of non-contradiction is enough to begin bootstrapping the last branch we'll discuss today, which is epistemology. Aristotle is often called the father of logic, and combining the methods of logic with the practical implications of the principle of non-contradiction is and will probably always be the method by which most humans actually gain knowledge. I wish there were more we could say about Kirito here, but that's just it. If you've ever successfully learned anything true about the world you live in, you've done it by means of logic and non-contradictory identification of the contents of your sense data. If you figured out what is meant by multiplication in the context of arithmetic, then you've understood that operation and how it can be applied to any set of numbers by logically connecting all the properties of this thing which we call multiplication. That's true whether you're multiplying the factors of your elementary math homework, or the days, hours, minutes, and seconds since you arrived in a simulation dreamt up by a complete utter basket case who wanted to build a castle in the sky for reasons he's forgotten. So while Kirito may not have a firm grasp of the philosophical significance of his actions, it is possible that you do now. In order to act with confidence in your actions and their outcomes, it is necessary that you don't contradict yourself on questions of what you should and shouldn't do. In order to know what you should or shouldn't do, you need to have a method of knowing things. Most humans, whether they acknowledge it or not, must rely on logically integrating non-contradictory facts into a connected whole. That remains true whether you're in what you think is the real world, or in what you're convinced is probably a simulation. And regardless of whether it is real or a simulation, you're still going to need to come to grips with the unshakable fact that it is. It exists, and wishing won't make it otherwise. Now, if only this black trenchcoat-wearing, self-destructive twerp could express in 3 seasons in a movie the amount of philosophical depth I've managed in less than 1,700 words, maybe this show wouldn't have been a penance to rewatch for analysis purposes. Next time, I find something interesting to say about Gurren Lagann to cleanse my palate. And until next time, it exists, and wishing won't make it otherwise. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for the greater glory of our button-mashing, search-indexing, entertainment industrial complex.